Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Glass in the Class. Today, live from Kent State University, we're talking about, well, relationship building. Can technology and relationship building get along? We have Alex Rican-Gonzalez with us, live from Kent State. She's going to introduce Gina Fiedel, and she is with us from Fat Eyes Web Development in Florida. We've known Gina a while. She's awesome, and these two are going to have a great conversation. How are you doing today, Alex?
I'm good, John. Thank you. Remind me at the end of this, my students last time, they were like, I feel like he would have a really good radio voice. And I was like, oh, he has such a great cheesy radio voice. I have to have you do it for my students. So remind me. I just remembered that with your intro. But hello, everybody. We are here with Gina Fiedel, and I'm so excited because I love Gina because she's just entered the realm of video, and that's really exciting for me because I was a part of that process. But Gina, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself to my students, and I'd really like you to talk about what you did before you did web design, because I think your history has a lot to do with relationship building.
Okay. First of all, John, I'm in Santa Barbara, not in
sorry.
Florida would be fun and not all that dissimilar. So, hi, everyone. It's really great to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me, Alex. It's always a thrill, and I'm just really glad to be here. So when you're referencing my history, I know that what you'd like me to bring up is that my first career was as a fine artist. I went to art school and had a career as a painter for a couple decades, and that was kind of how I got my start in communication, because while a lot of people may not realize it, art making is as much communication as anything else. And so it was kind of a really natural segue from that into becoming a web designer and having a web development company, because that's also about communication. And so the two tie in really well. And we've always felt in our company that our background, my husband is my partner and he was also an artist, and we've always attributed our ability to listen to our clients and be able to understand their intent and what they're hoping to communicate through their websites, primarily because of our history as artists. Because when you're an artist, you're always in the position of defending your work and talking about what your work is about. So you make the work, but it really is nothing until you're able to talk about it, which came as a huge surprise to me as a young artist. But that's how it was.
So why did you transition out of the fine arts?
That's kind of a long story. In the early 90s, there was a huge recession and disposable income just became unavailable, and about a little more than half the galleries in New York closed at that time. And so the whole art world was suffering tremendously, and that was part of the story. The other part of the story is that we were successful, and my husband in particular had an international career, and it was highly, highly stressful. And as an artist, as a young person choosing to pursue a career in the arts, what I imagined was that it would afford me a lot of freedom, and it would be a way to make a difference in the world. And I think that a lot of young people coming up and choosing their careers, that may be a motivating factor. And what we learned over time, and what I learned personally for myself, was that the art world is really narrow, and we really were having a dialogue with a very elite group. And that became more and more frustrating as the years went by. And for instance, don't ever smile when you're having your photo taken. I mean, come on, right? And just a lot of pressure in terms of who your what your identity is and how you portray yourself and how you communicate with the world. If it didn't fit neatly into the philosophy and the general tone of the art world, the context that we were in, then we didn't succeed. So we were lucky enough to have get what we wished for, but then we found out that we didn't like it after all. So going into business and doing what we're doing now, we've found that we've been able to make a much greater difference. And I like to participate in the real world, which we were not doing prior.
So you transitioned from something that would be considered rather traditional. I mean, the fine arts have been around for a really long time, and you transitioned into something that is changing constantly. You transitioned into web design. You transitioned into something that you have to adapt all the time. How did you make that transition?
We're still making it because it's changing all the time. So we actually took a bit of a slow route. We were doing some creative projects with my brother, who at the time was a film composer. And so we were training ourselves in all kinds of digital media. We were doing video and 3D and illustration, just you name it, any kind of electronic media we were dipping into. So we had a number of years where that transition occurred. And prior to that, Doug was, my partner, husband, was participating with a collaborative art group and doing multimedia. So it was kind of a slow trickle into making that adjustment. And yeah, you're right, it's something that's changing all the time. And what I find is it's close to impossible to stay up with all of the developments all of the time. So we make a great effort to do our best and to be in touch with everything that connects up with the work that we do. But I realize that there's just always so much more.
So in line with that, we're talking about building relationships today, and you were in a business that, fine arts, they've been around for a really long time. A lot of your interactions, I imagine, were face to face. Now, I would assume that many of your interactions don't occur face to face, and a lot of your relationship building may occur in a computer mediated context. So, how did how do you see the two differing first? What's the difference between building relationships and the different
It's a great question, and I actually feel like it's a question that I'm constantly asking and answering every single day and with each relationship, because what we've learned is that all of our clients are different, and therefore every single relationship we have in our work environment is different. So we're always having to learn new skills and new sort of devise new ways of being understood and understanding who's speaking to us. Typically, with most of our clients, the majority of our clients are local, so we're lucky enough to be able to meet face to face, at least initially. We've worked with a lot of people that we've never met as well. And what you end up realizing is that email is a really imperfect form of communication. Even speaking on the phone can be imperfect. And now we have video, which is really helpful. That started with GoToMeeting or Skype or those other team builder things like that. But it's a constant nuance recognition where each person that you're speaking with has their communication style. So regardless of the medium, whether you're in person or you're online or you're emailing, you still need to use basically the same skills that you would have in a face-to-face, but they're a little bit more challenging. And then the minute I say they're more challenging, I kind of question that, and I wonder if that's even true, because really true good communication is always challenging, no matter what form it's taking.
Yeah, I totally agree. It really is. I mean, I know that we've had numerous conversations and comment threads about this sort of thing, the challenges of finding meaning in communication, especially in a mediated context. But what does that mean to my students that will be entering the work world? I mean, when they're trying to find jobs, and a lot of these jobs now do online applications, and they do a lot of email communication and phone calls. What does that mean for them to really get their message across to potential employers?
Well, I think you know, whenever we're communicating, for me, the very first step is to listen, because understanding who it is that we're communicating with is primary, right? So when you're faced with online applications and emails and never getting that body language face-to-face advantage, then it's just incredibly, incredibly important not to rush through things, not to make assumptions, not to trying to find the word, gloss over all of the details in the communication that's being made to you. One of the frustrations that I have is that it just seems incredibly apparent so often that people aren't even reading carefully. They're not digesting the material that they're presented with because they're in a hurry and they're not taking the time that's needed. So my first suggestion would be probably to slow down a little bit and make sure that you're seeing everything that's in front of you, because we so often don't.
So is there a way for them to, if there's an employer that they're really interested in now, is there a way for them to start building a relationship now without actually trying to apply for a job? Do you think
Well,
that?
yeah, that's, depending on who the employer is, what I imagine it would start with is a Google search and checking out their website and seeing what their social channels are and how they're conducting themselves on social media, and get yourself in there and start to make comments, read their articles, comment on their blog, make yourself known by being communicative with them. And if you can do that without a separate agenda, then all the more reason to pursue it. And as long as you're being authentic and not just trying to ingratiate yourself, I think that can be a really positive experience. And at the same time, you'll learn more about the business culture, and you may end up deciding it's not, in fact, a company that you wish to associate with. So you never know.
Absolutely. I, of course, always have questions for you, Gina, but does anyone have any questions for her?
Are those 5
And
pictures
speak up.
of brains?
Oh, what are
The 5
the
pictures.
5 pictures behind you? Are those of brains? Is the question that I have from Kyle.
Yes, they are. That's some older artwork of my husband's, Doug Anderson, and the small pieces are brains, and they're painted on glass, and some of them have paint on both sides and some of them just on one side. And they're from a show that was probably back in 89, 90, maybe 93, actually, come to think of it. I can't remember exactly. And then the paper pieces that are on the wall are more recent works of his.
Other questions?
Thanks for asking.
So from my understanding, you came from liking to build art to liking to build web designs, correct?
Sorry, I can't hear quite well enough.
So he's saying that from what he understands, you went from building or creating art to building websites. So
So pretty much like you transition your wanting to paint from your just your gut feeling of you loving to paint to a modern way of pretty much designing different things. So you like to design pictures and paint, and like pretty much you just like to design your how to. I'm trying to figure out how to word it. Pretty much.
I think I got it. That's a really, I love that you said that, because especially in the early years of our business, we've been at this for 16 years, and we do generally let our clients know that we have this background in the arts because we want them to understand that we have a lot of experience with the visual craft. But something that's really important that we always say is that we're not just making pretty pictures, because really the functionality of a website is completely priority, and it's intrinsically wrapped with the visuals and the look and feel and the environment of the website. And you really can't separate them out. So yeah, we love making things that are visually appealing and even beautiful, but if that's if the hierarchy is to have that at the top, the website will not be successful. So we also explain that when we gave up our art careers, we also put our egos aside, and we need to actually communicate for our clients. We are not the communicators, they are. So it's kind of like we're their hands and their voice and their eyes, making a platform for them to do their communication to the world.
Well said.
Thank you.
How did, I mean, really, how did you learn that functionality aspect of web design?
Well, we had some training. We went to school and we studied and we continued working on that. We still do. I mean, we're always learning because things are always changing. And most recently, about 3 or 4 years ago, switching over to WordPress sites as opposed to Dreamweaver sites, we had a lot to learn. And there are always, because technology is always changing, it's an ongoing process. And because we had that interlude of doing electronic media of all kinds, we were becoming really familiar and very comfortable working in a computing setting rather than having a bunch of paint and turpentine and the big mess that creates. So
Yeah, web design can create a whole new kind of mess, can't it?
Exactly. But at least I don't have to change my clothes 40 times a day.
Just out of curiosity, do you still do fine arts for fun and for relaxation?
Yeah, I actually stopped for about 17 years, and it was an odd thing. I felt I didn't have anything else that I wanted to say, and I was so tired of the whole picture of it, and I stopped. And a number of years ago now, I don't remember how many, I decided that I was missing it. So I did start again, and up until about a little over a year ago, I've been painting again. But I started writing, and I'm just really taken with writing now, so I actually haven't picked up a paintbrush in about a year.
Interesting. Do you consider, I know you said that, you know, you had to put your egos aside when you took up web design, but do you consider the websites that you build to be works of art?
What an interesting question. Yes, I do. I would say yes, particularly the ones that we like best. And, you know, because we don't have a particular niche and we work with companies from all different kinds of industries, the needs vary wildly. So we definitely have certain attraction or attachment to some sites over other sites. But yeah, whenever you're creating something with intention and a purpose to communicate, that is a form of art. So yeah, I do see it that way.
So you mentioned that you know, the website serves as a voice, a communication platform for your clients. With the fine arts, do you feel like that was more a platform for your own voice? Would you say that would be a difference between the two? And on that and on that vein, would you say that in web design, building relationships, this is going to be a tough question for you. Would you say that in web design, building relationships is more important than in the fine arts?
I want to say yes. And I also probably need to think about that some more because it is kind of a layered question. When we were making art, it was a self-expression. And within the context that we were making art, there was a discourse. Absolutely. There was a dialogue that was going on amongst artists, curators, writers, and collectors. And we were always cognizant of that, and we always were intending and hoping to be part of a larger conversation. And I believe that we were. So in that sense, it's not that dissimilar from the web. But I wouldn't say that I was developing relationships with the viewers of my art at all in the same way that I am now. It does feel really different because now, because it's not about self-expression, it's about offering something to an audience that has a need. That means that we need to understand who they are and what their questions are and what their needs are so that we can help them to solve their problems and we can offer them something useful. When it's self-expression, that doesn't really matter, and it's really not meant to matter because we don't want to be overly self-conscious if we're expressing ourselves, right? We want it to be true to who we are. Whereas now we need to be authentic and we want our identity to be real, but the work that we're producing isn't meant to be, this is me, this is about who I am. It's meant to be about the people in the audience and the people that it serves and who will use it. I hope that answered your question.
It did. It did. I know it was a tricky question for you, and I always feel bad, like, pitting one against the other. I'm sure building relationships is important in both, but I think it's interesting to consider the different needs of different niches.
I think it's
building relationships.
I agree, and it's making art is it's a self-referential kind of act in a lot of ways. And even though there is a discourse in the greater context and culture that you're creating the art in, and you're often making commentary on the culture, the popular culture, all of that, it's just not the same because in a way you might be able to compare it a little bit with broadcast advertising compared to inbound marketing, where you're purposefully throwing something out there with an awareness of who your audience might be. But with the web and inbound marketing and what we're doing now, we're really trying to take more, like the scales are tipped differently so that we're taking more of the information from our audience and giving that a higher value than just what we personally think, if that makes sense. But it's all the same also. It's all really wrapped up together and woven together. So it's fascinating to me that you're asking, that you're kind of framing our conversation around these issues. And I hadn't really thought about it this much before, so I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I look forward to the post that comes out about this. I'm sure you'll write it in a fantastic blog post.
Like, why did she ask me that?
Me on the spot. One more question that I do have. What would you say was the most difficult part of building relationships as a fine artist?
Well, if I'm really candid, it was the feeling of being a pet. When you're an artist, you're relating often and very frequently to the people who are buying your art. So you're always kind of under their wing and being observed by them, and there was always this feeling of being kind of like they would be enamored with us, but that we were somehow lower on the totem pole. So I always used to call it being their pet. And, we may have been beloved, but I never felt truly equal. And there was a lot of power being wielded. So you're constantly under the duress of that potential power. And I do not feel that way creating relationships in my current life at all. I feel like we're collaborating with the people that we're creating relationships with. And every single time we work for a company to create a website with them, we're really team building and we're collaborating and we're in it in the trenches together. And there isn't a hierarchy. And sure, they're paying us to do it, but the mentality is really that we're joining together to create something.
That's really interesting. Okay, you hinted to my next question. I only have two more, I promise. What would you say is the most difficult thing about building relationships as an individual on the web?
It takes a lot of time. And
It's
and it
true.
takes a lot of focus. And relationships are probably the single most important thing to me in my life. And there have even been times in my life when I've been seeking to find out kind of the existential, why am I here? And what am I doing? And it's always come down to relationships. That's always been what I care about most. And so communication and relationships are the most dear to my heart. And so I've approached creating relationships online with that same dedication and commitment. And that means that it takes a lot of time. It takes time to get to know people. It takes time to be able to understand what they're saying to you. It takes time to be able to organize your thoughts in a way that your comments are specific to the person that you're speaking to rather than generic or formalized. So that's the hardest thing. It's just giving it the attention that I feel it deserves. And I know there's a lot of resistance to that. And I know there's a lot of resistance to that with our clients. But there's really not that big a difference between online and offline if you're talking about quality relationships. So how do you make a best friend? How do you find your partner? Who do you marry? You know, how do you treat your mom? It's not really any different.
Absolutely. So you hinted to my final question. What would you say that it's the same that's the same difficulty that you would have building relationships as a brand? What's the biggest difficulty building relationships on the web as a brand?
That's been much harder for me. And I have, in a lot of ways, I've loosened up on that in favor of building relationships as an individual and trusting that the people who know me as an individual and connect me with my brand will help to build the relationship with the brand. So I've been personally going at it from a personal point of view. And there's just a lot more accessibility that way. People tend to respond more to an individual than they do to a brand. And my profile versus my pages on Google Plus are a perfect example of that. I can post the exact same article on both and give them both the same attention, and not much will happen on the brand side when a lot, as you've witnessed, will happen on the personal side. So it's a lot more challenging to talk to people as Fat Eyes Web Development than it is to talk to people as Gina Fiedel. So what I'm trusting is that over time, more and more people will understand the connection between the two, and I'm constantly working at that.
Okay, I know I said that was my last question, but I have one more before I let you go. You know, you said that you focus more on yourself as an individual in the hopes that people will connect to you with your brand. I assume that you tell your clients something similar. Have you seen some resistance to this idea of being yourself first on the web and your brand second?
You know, when I talk to clients about that, let's say first that there's huge resistance to a lot of what I tell my clients all of the time, because everybody is strapped for time and it feels overwhelming and there's a lot of fear. So within that sort of general overall resistance, what I think I am discerning is that when I explain that they can go, especially the really tiny companies or the solopreneurs, when I explain that they can use their own persona and that they can do this work as themselves, that generally brings a sigh of relief, because they know themselves better than they know their own companies, typically. So there's kind of this edge that gets taken off if they realize that they can just step online, step into that space and be the same as they are offline, then they feel a little bit more comfortable and they can get a little bit more initial traction. And the bigger companies aren't as concerned about it. So they understand, they've already kind of made those delineations within the structure of the company.
Right, right. Yeah, I see that time and time again. I could talk to you for hours.
I know.
It's ridiculous.
Everybody just go away. We're just going to talk.
But all right, thank you so much, Gina, for coming
You're
to my
welcome.
classroom. You have such a unique perspective, and I love it. You
Thank
don't find many fine artists that make the leap to web development and technology. So I just love talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and you're welcome. It's my pleasure.
All right, John, take us out with radio voice. Could you do it?
I can do that with radio voice. All right, everybody, thank you for joining us for another episode of Glass in Class. And this has been live from Kent State University and Gina Fiedel from Santa Barbara, California with Fat Eyes Web Development. Let's make sure we get that clear. Thank you for joining us, Gina. Your insights on web development and technology versus relationship have been brilliant. And we thank you all for watching out there. We will see you again another time for another edition of Glass in the Class. One moment.